Now then, I want to talk about the practical aspects of cross-examination. How do you go about it? Now, the threefold rule, preparation is the first one, preparation is the second one, and preparation is the third one. Preparation, preparation, preparation. That's what you do. You have different types of cases, to state the obvious. You've got the very simple case of the running down case, did witnesses see what happened, etc. Then you've got at the other end of the scale the huge fraud cases, which might be in civil or criminal courts. You've got the money laundering cases where you've got bundles from here to the end of the table there. You have to know your case inside out and backwards. The mere fact that there are 30 or 40 bundles, which happens often enough, may mean there's a huge amount of cross-examination. It may mean that there's only a little bit of cross-examination. And you've got to know. You have to know, you have to take a view, and that's what you're paid to do. You have to take a view as to how much you need to cross-examine. And the preparation, and I'm sorry to keep repeating this, but it doesn't mean asking lots and lots of questions. The preparation means asking the right questions. Now, the questions that you're going to ask come from two areas. First of all, on the papers that you have, let's work on the long case. The papers that you have and the evidence that the witness has given, and the evidence that other witnesses have given beforehand, and the witness statements of those other witnesses. Now, there's many different ways of doing it, and I've seen many different ways of doing it. There was an English silk who led me a long time ago, and what he was very, very able, what he did, he'd start at the top and he'd say, question A, and then he'd have the various possible answers, and from each one he'd have the answer, what he would do in regard of each one, and it looked like some scientists had drawn up the basis of evolution, because he would have hundreds, perhaps more than hundreds, of possible questions he was going to ask. If the answer is A, then he had a whole lot of different questions. If the answer is A1, then he had a whole lot more. If it's A2, a whole lot more, and cross-references and things like that. Well, if you can do it, good luck to you. But most of us, none of us can do it except for him. Nobody else I've ever heard of could do it. But that's what I meant by the extremes of preparation. Now, when you go through your papers, to start with, talking, I suppose, to some extent to barristers, which is different, because he gets the case when it's prepared by the solicitor. The solicitor's getting it in stages as things develop. But in principle, it makes no difference. Once you sit down to do your cross-examination, I'm suggesting you make a note of the questions that you're going to ask. Not necessarily the specific ones. Dear Mrs. Wong, on the 13th of March, did you walk down Connaught Road? Not that. But more specifically is, ask Mrs. Wong about Connaught Road. Then you will mark your papers, have a separate piece of paper about the questions you're going to ask. Always bearing in mind, a lot of it's got to be done on your feet, because it sounds easy enough to prepare everything, and you need to know the areas that you're going to cross-examine on, but the answers are never going to be perfect, the perfect answers that you want, and you have to think on your feet to a very large extent. Now, often you can't anticipate, and you have to improvise. The witness is giving evidence. If you can record it by hand or on your iPads or whatever, fine. And if you can mark it at the time, fine. If you can't, you can't. If you've got live note or something like that in court, which that doesn't happen very often, you can mark what's going on. But most of the time, you'll have to be making your own notes. And you're making your notes when the evidence is giving, when the witness is giving evidence in chief, and you're making notes while you're cross-examining. So you've got to do that. You should be possibly making arrows at the side of what you're doing, but making notes specifically of what you're going to ask. It's embarrassing, I have to say, and it's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to everybody who does cross-examination. You sit down and just think of that brilliant question you should have asked, but you forgot to write it down. That's what happens.